So I'd like to thank Wolfgang, Dima and Thomas for a very nice introduction to this symposium. I have been blessed in the sense that I've had a chance to attend all the HFE symposia this far, so this is the third one. I was there in Rostock in 2011 and 2 years ago in Berlin also. And these have been wonderful events, really stimulating conferences or symposia. And I have no doubts these will be also like the others. The title of this symposium has its name Time, Space, Data and Research. I will be touching all of those 4 dimensions, perhaps coincidentally, that wasn't planned so, but I will be telling about data environment, about time, space, variation in fertility, and of course about my research also. But I will also talk about the dimension that is not in the title of the symposium, and actually not in the title of my talk either that is in the program. I think the title of the program is something along the lines of Changing Spatial Variation in Fertility Across Europe. And yes, that still matches quite well with what I'm going to talk about, but there's one critical dimension that is missing from that title, and that's development. And it will come clear throughout the talk why I think that development is one of the key dimensions along which we should try to understand fertility variation. My talk today, it is part of a broader research agenda that our institute, together with a larger network of institutes, roughly 50 institutions slash scientists, have put together with a goal of trying to understand better what are the shifts between intersection between fertility and development. So the long-standing negative relationship between development, however measured, and fertility appears to be subject to change in much of the developed world. And what brings us together in this network is to decide to understand where is this change happening, among whom, why, for what kinds of measures of development, what kinds of measures of fertility. Is it only postponement effects? Is it something more deeper? And of course, ultimately, what does all this mean for our understanding of fertility? Beyond this idea of trying to understand better the shifts in the development-fertility nexus, what brings the network together that I'm mentioning here is our ability within this network to access register-type data, registered data or register-type data for all of the countries that are involved in the network. And I want to highlight one thing regarding the network that partially is covered by this map. A paper arising from the work of this network was just finished, and that paper covered these countries and subnational variation in fertility in each of these countries. What I'm really happy about is that when I talk about registered type data that allows us to analyze spatial variation in fertility, it's not Scandinavia only. Finland, Sweden and Norway are there, but many other countries are also providing data that is of registered type quality. So in some sense, the old-fashioned idea that registered type data is only Scandinavian data, that certainly doesn't hold anymore. Similar type of data can be accessed from various European countries already and also beyond Europe. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our host for allowing us yesterday within this network to kickstart our work and have a jumpstart to this symposium by having a satellite or shadow meeting of this network that we had within the premises of this campus. So VID and Wittgenstein Center wonderfully allowed us to use the locations here. We got everything that we needed in order to move our research agenda forward. Now my talk is very much inspired by the work happening in this network. There are some other papers within this symposium also that arise from this network that brings together register-based data sets that allow to analyze better the fertility development nexus. Now why development? Why is that important? Here's a figure that should motivate the focus on development. This is an old graph already, but updates would look very similar. The graph plots total fertility rate, period total fertility rate, against one measure of development, the Human Development Index for 1975 and 2005 for a large number of countries, basically countries for which data was available at the time of creating this figure. And there are three interesting stylized facts emerging from this figure. The first, clearly strongest stylized fact emerging from this figure is that development is negatively associated with fertility. If you divide this graph, for example, into thirds, the lowest development, middle development, and high development countries, fertility declines monotonically from low to middle to high development. That's the first. That's the power of development in reducing fertility. But there's more. The other stylized fact is that there's a level shift for any level of development. If we move from 1975 to 2005, fertility level is lower in 2005 compared to 1975. So even though fertility in itself is a powerful force in bringing down, development in itself is a powerful force bringing down fertility across countries, there is much more in determining fertility levels than just development. This declining fertility has been much stronger than what development in itself would have predicted. And the third stylized fact happens here among the most developed countries. As we can see, the monotonic negative association starts to break down at high levels of development and potentially reverses to a positive one. This is a cross-sectional pattern, and lots of things might be driving this association between, positive association between development and fertility. Further research, I will not have time to go into details of that, do suggest, however, that this cross-sectional pattern is also observed within countries, and gender equality appears to be a strong moderating factor for whether positive impact of the impact of development could be positive on fertility or not. But this is the cross-national story, and my title had spatial variation in it. And choosing to focus on national level variation is a decision that comes with serious consequences to what one can do. One nice consequence is that one can use, for example, the wonderful human fertility database data, high quality data at national level of fertility, and one doesn't need to worry too much about data quality then. But national level data also hides extremely important variation, within country variation, both in terms of levels of development and in terms of fertility. And moreover, when we look at national level variation in a cross-sectional graph like this, it is possible that we are just seeing what is sort of known. Countries are different. They might be different both in development and levels of fertility for other reasons than development driving fertility. So that's the motivation for going at the subnational level. And in this remaining time of the talk, I will try to answer the question, is a positive relationship between fertility and economic development emerging at the subnational regional level? There's a subtitle to my talk, Theoretical Considerations and Evidence from Europe, which means that I try to say something useful both in terms of why might we expect a changing pattern between development and fertility at the subnational level, and then later on, in some sense as an afterthought, I will look at the evidence. How does the data support or does not support the theoretical predictions that we have? The work that I'm presenting is based on collaboration between me, Sebastian Klutner, and Jonathan Fox. At the time of starting this collaboration a couple of years ago, John, Sebastian, and me, we were all at Max Planck Institute. Now John is at Freie University Berlin, and Sebastian is at the Bundesinstitut für Bevölkerungsforschung in Wiesbaden. The background aim, I think I covered that already, so we can skip that. But I said that I want to talk about theory a bit. Some of the processes, theoretical processes, that we think might result at the subnational level in a positive relationship between levels of development and fertility, they operate on a long time scale. And in order to situate these long time scales in any meaningful manner into broad perspectives of fertility change, it's good to look back at how, over the history, levels of development or perhaps measured by income, how they are related to fertility variation. So it's hard to know from historical data, but it appears that prior to the demographic transition, much of fertility variation was characterized by Malthusian cycles. So with increasing incomes, fertility increased, and with worse economic times, with harvest failures and so on, fertility decreased. So that can be reworded by saying that there was a positive relationship between fertility and income in historical periods, and in many parts in Europe, as Wegeard's work suggests. And importantly, when we think about subnational variation, prior to the demographic transition, it appears that there were only small urban-rural differences in fertility. Now then, the demographic transition started to evolve, and what is an observation and not an explanation yet is that this negative relationship between fertility and this decline in fertility started stronger in more developed and in more urban areas than in the less developed and less urban areas. So fertility decline was really driven by high developed areas. And why is that the case? There are various potential theoretical frameworks to try to understand why did the high developed regions lead the fertility decline. One of them is, of course, related to the idea of people switching from investing into quantity of children to investing into quality of children, as the idea that children might be more than just workforce in, for example, one's local farm started to get weaker, and the educational opportunities started to open, career prospects even started to emerge over the time of over the process of industrialization. At the same time, the costs and opportunity costs of having children changed. The same way, or hand in hand with how the spatial organization of the economic sphere has changed. So if one thinks of pre-industrial or proto-industrial spatial organization of economic activities, much of the work happened at home. For example, on one's own farm, or in the proto-industrial system, for example, weaving, craftsmanship, that was work activity that took place at home. With industrialization, with the rise of factories, industrial zones, and so on, the geographic distance between where one lives and where one works started to increase, and that immediately creates a pressure, negative pressure on fertility. So these are some of the reasons why we think that urban and developed areas were leading the fertility decline. And some of these reasons might play out in a similar manner, but just in a reverse way, as we now fast forward to today and try to think why might we be witnessing another reversal in the development-fertility association at the subnational level. The first reason is shift in family policies. So family policies can be categorized in many, many ways. One useful categorization is to think of, in a sense, first-generation family policies versus second-generation family policies. And first-generation family policies, many of them coming soon after the Second World War, within nations that were concerned about population size, family policies were often basically cash or tax credits for children. And these were not means-tested. And if one thinks of what a non-means tested lump sum additional amount of money per child gives you in a highly developed area versus low-cost, low-developed area, it's quite obvious that such non-means tested benefits might have benefited or boosted fertility much more in low development areas than in high development areas. Now, the second generation of family policies is quite different, and instead of just providing money, they try to alleviate the opportunity costs of having children. So not only money, but also time is included in these second generation family policy packages. And also money, when it's included, it's often means tested, so that, for example, parental leave benefits might be pegged to one's previous own income. And such processes, changes in family policies, are likely to benefit in particular couples, dual working career couples. And these are much more concentrated in high developed areas than low developed areas. So we might think that this change from first generation family policies to second generation family policies helps in particular couples in high developed areas. So that's first point, shift in family policies. The second is what one could call the digital revolution. There is again a change in the spatial organization of the economic sphere. Telework, remote work, whatever you call it, it's becoming much and much more prevalent. People in particular in higher occupational status jobs are much more able to now control where and at what times they log in the hours that they need to log in and do the work that they need to do. And there's good evidence that individuals' own ability to think how much control they have over their work, that is positively associated with fertility intentions. And we believe that these changing patterns in how work is organized spatially, these are likely to benefit again in particular women and couples of high education, those that are more concentrated in high developed areas. And basically giving another reason to think that there might be changing association within countries in the fertility development association. And the third process, which might boost a change in the development fertility association at the subnational level, is selective migration within and across countries. So migrants tend to be positively selected across various characteristics in terms of health, in terms of resources, and so on. This might directly positively influence high developed regions, as high developed regions are the attractors of migration flows. But they might also indirectly suppress fertility in less developed regions by, for example, creating these migration flows, creating imbalances in the sex ratio of marriage age population. So these 3 points give us reason to think that there might be within nations a change in development fertility association. There's of course many other important things also happening simultaneously as these changes are evolving, and one of the key ones is the postponement transition. And it's possible that less developed areas are in different situation in terms of their postponement transition, and this might create challenges in empirically identifying the association between development and fertility. Another challenge is the post-communist transition in Eastern Europe that obviously creates a break that is difficult to model in any empirical framework. And how do we handle these challenges 1 and 2? We aim at temp adjusting the measures of fertility that we use, and then we look at separately various regions within Europe, Eastern Europe and other regions. Data. We will be looking at total fertility rates at NUTS 2 level across 20 European countries. We will correlate that with one measure of development, employee compensation per capita. That may surprise you. Why not use a local variant of the GDP per capita? We were able to get employee compensation per capita for longer time series than GDP per capita, so that's one of the key reasons. It turns out that when with restricted data for the data points for which we have GDP per capita, we get exactly the same results. The time span that we cover is 1990 to 2012, and as said, NUTS 2 is the level at which we are modeling the dynamics between development and fertility. We drop country units that have only very few NUTS 2 regions. Basically, 4 is our cutoff. Here's a scatter plot that doesn't differentiate any specific countries. This is basically all NUTS 2 regions across these 20 countries, plotted in 1995 and 2012. On the x-axis, there's a log of employee compensation per capita, and on y-axis, there's total fertility rate, period fertility rate. And what one see from 1995 that is that there's appears to be a data cloud that doesn't really have a clear shape. It's hard to say what might be the relationship based on this purely cross-sectional, all countries pooled level of economic development fertilization. In 2012, one might see here a U-shape that would suggest that at low levels of economic development, increasing development is associated with decreasing fertility. With higher levels of economic development, it's the opposite. However, this is such a strong U-shape that it perhaps would be unrealistic to think that this is the way fertility reacts to increasing development. So much more likely is that there are some countries that's clustered here and other countries clustered here. So this is the cross-sectional, all countries pooled pattern that gives some hints regarding potentially changing pattern regarding fertility and development at the subnational level. But we can, of course, with the data that we have, we can dig deeper. And the first step that we do is we look at just within countries cross-sectional coefficients at every single year between local level of employee compensation per capita, our measure of development, and period total fertility rate. This is a two-involved equation for the simple thing that we are doing. Basically, we are just lagging employee compensation per capita by 1 year and correlating that with the level of TFR. Now I'm showing the results for TFR not adjusted for tempo effects. The patterns would be quite similar if we use tempo adjustment. So this is what the patterns look like in Western Europe, Central and South Western Europe. We have here 6 different countries for this region of Europe. And in 1990, 4 out of 6 countries had a negative correlation within a country between level of economic development and fertility. And 2 countries had a moderately positive correlation between level of economic development and fertility. And over time, over this 22-year time period, there seems to be a general tendency, first in terms of weakening of this negative association between economic development and fertility, and then in most recent data points that we have here, many countries break from negative to positive, and by 2012, 4 countries out of 6 already have a positive association within countries between level of economic development and fertility. And these 2, what one could say, laggards, Germany West and Greece, they've also reached a level that's very close to 0. So at least for this set of countries, it appears that there is a changing relationship between economic development and fertility at the subnational level. We see something similar for Eastern Europe, for which interpretation is, if possible, slightly harder than it is for other regions because of the post-communist transition. But overall, we see a quite similar pattern, just with starting levels lower. So here, in early 1990s, for all countries that we have in Eastern Europe, the association between economic development and fertility was strongly negative. Over the 22-year period, this association is strongly changing, and by 2012, half of the countries have a positive one, half roughly have a negative correlation between level of economic development and fertility. So again, fairly consistent evidence that this association might be changing across time within countries. Now if you go and look at North and West Europe, some qualitatively different pattern emerges. One could perhaps characterize this best by saying that there's stability. We have in total 8 countries characterized as North and West Europe, and some countries are stable, positive correlation, some countries are fairly stable, negative correlation, for example Denmark, and some countries are moving slightly up or down. Sweden and Norway are moving upwards. Finland is an interesting outlier here, going to a trajectory, towards a trajectory that no other country is going. But it looks like if we categorize Europe into 3 regions. In 2 of the regions we see a fairly strong evidence of changing taxation, and in 1, North and West Europe, we see perhaps stability. But these cross-country, within time cross-country correlations, they might still be confounded by lots of things that we just did not account for in the very simple correlation that we calculated. For example, within countries, over time, family policies may be changing, attitudes towards female labor force participation may be changing, and so forth. And this is all something that is not captured by the previous slides that basically looked at raw correlations with economic development lag by 1 year. What we can do with the panel data that we have, we can include a country by year fixed effect controls that basically remove all the confounding factors that vary within time, within country over time. So it's a country level control. If there is within a country, say, a new family policy, this confounding effect of such a family policy will be removed. If there is gradually changing attitudes towards women working, that will also be removed by this time by country or country by time fixed effect. So we estimate such models as a robustness check. We also estimated bunch of additional models that also control within region fixed effects, and the results turn out to be very similar. So I just focus on this country by time fixed effect results. Again, there are equations for the regressionists, but they are uninteresting in themselves. What you need to know is that we include a quadratic of employee compensation per capita that allows us to detect if there is a changing relationship between economic development and fertility. That quadratic allows us to detect that changing relationship, and then we control for country by time fixed effects. This is what the regression coefficients look like. Quadratics, interpreting quadratic regressions just by looking at the coefficients is somewhat tricky because they scale in a way that the first term may move to one direction, the other term may move to other direction, and seeing where the inflection point is not trivial based on coefficients. But across Europe, in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe, we see a similar pattern. The first term of the quadratic is negative, so that suggests that there is overall a negative association between development and fertility. The second term is positive, which suggests that this overall negative association at some level of economic development reverses from negative to positive. And this here tells you at what point across all Europe it's 18k employee compensation per capita. In Western Europe it's 24k, in Eastern Europe it's 7k. These numbers come with very high uncertainty. So saying that, well, that's the point where the inversion happens, that would be not wise based on the uncertainty that there is in the data, but qualitatively it appears that both in Eastern and Western Europe there is this inversion at high levels, certainly relatively high levels of employee compensation per capita. The association between development and fertility reverses from negative to positive, and in Western Europe this happens at the higher level of economic development. If we did the same regressions using tempo-adjusted fertility, we would get sort of fairly similar coefficients and fairly similar inversion points. If one were to test statistically whether these inversion points are different compared to the ones that we get without tempo adjustment, one would come back with empty hands, so there is no evidence for these being different, which is to some extent a statement saying that there's a lot of variation in the data. But basically, we were not able to find evidence that there would not be a reversal, even if we did our best to tempo adjust the fertility rates. Now, a key limitation in terms of our tempo adjustment is that we don't have parity-specific fertility. So we have to resort to a crude tempo adjustment, which is basically using only mean age at birth, all births combined. And this might, to some extent, underestimate the overall effect of the tempo transition, and how that would play out in the results if we were able to fully adjust for tempo effects is slightly uncertain. It turns out to be even difficult to estimate the direction of the bias if we were able to fully get that tempo adjustment. So, let me get to the conclusions. It appears, at least based on some theoretical grounds, that there's a reason to expect that the long-standing negative relationship between development and fertility at the subnational level might be subject to change. We believe that selective migration, the new generation of family policies, and the changing spatial organization of the economic sphere, they all might be contributing to how highly developed regions might be changing in terms of fertility behavior differently compared to less developed regions. Our cross-sectional analysis from a large number of European countries suggested that this actually might be true, and panel regressions provided further evidence that presumably this long-standing negative relationship has, at least when looking up to 2012, has to a large extent come to an end. Now, there are important shifts happening in fertility right now, as we saw in the introductory speeches. Finland and Norway are experiencing never seen before level fertility declines. Germany at the same time is experiencing fertility increases. So we don't know whether this is again a new era that is just not captured by 2012 data. But at least in the time window covering 22 years from 1990 to 2012, it appears that this change has been taking place. As you probably noticed, the talk sort of came into two dimensions. One was theoretical considerations as to why there might be a change, and then there was the data analysis. Now, if you would actually probe me about this, I would have to confess that, well, we didn't really test any of these specific theories. We made some arguments as to why there might be a change happening, and then we looked at whether the change is happening, but none of the arguments that we put forward were really tested by the data. We cannot do that with the kind of data that we were using in this paper. We believe that we can test many of these specific theories using high-quality register data that we hope to have access to across a large number of European countries. One thing that I should mention regarding all of these theories is that they predict something specific regarding high versus low educated women. And for example, the family policies, second generation family policies, are likely to benefit in particular those whose income potential is relatively high, that is high educated women. So these changes that we see within countries between level of development and fertility are likely to be much more visible if we were able to look at fertility by education. With the data that we had at hand, we weren't able to look at that at all. But the story continues. So Jessica Nissen and colleagues from the register-based fertility research network will be presenting tomorrow at 10 a.m. this paper that goes at the educational level. Thank you very much.